Hi, everyone. I'm so happy you can join us for another Project Blue webinar. My name is Jenny Crusoe, and I'm the founding executive director at AltaSea. Project Blue is a digital education platform designed to provide science-based programming through our webinars and our live chats, and to inspire the next generation of scientists and explorers. With the help of our great partners, we've been able to reach thousands of households throughout the state and continue to foster passion and learning for the role the ocean plays in our planet. We're excited to be able to host yet again an impressive panel of women with top scientists from Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, and the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, California. They are Dr. Jen Smith, Dr. Sarah Purkey, and Dr. Cara Field. All of them are on the front lines fighting to save our ocean and the animals that call the ocean their home. This webinar is a prime example of what AltaSea is all about. We're convening top minds in the field of research and innovation, working for a common goal: a sustainable future for our ocean and for our planet. I will turn it over to our moderator, the fabulous Val Savala, a multi-Emmy award-winning journalist who has so graciously given her time to lead this conversation on one of the most pressing challenges that face the world today: climate change. Thank you, Val. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here. I always learn so much when I moderate these conversations. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our three amazing women, all doctors in the PhD sense, and doing fantastic work with our ocean. So let me begin with Dr. Jenny Smith. Dr. Jenny Smith is a professor in marine ecology and conservation in the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. Her research is focused on coral reefs off some of the most remote islands. A remote island is actually an island nation called Kiribati, which is in the middle of the South Pacific. It's almost like, I think, more than 3,000 miles north of New Zealand, out in the middle of the ocean. She has witnessed firsthand the effects that humans have on the islands. She compares those islands impacted by human activity to those less disturbed by humans. Dr. Smith is well known for her work with the 100 Island Challenge project that aims to map and collect coral reef data from around the globe. She also has experience with seaweed cultivation through her work with the startup California Seaweed Company. It works to sustainably cultivate top quality culinary seaweeds and a type of red algae that, when used in livestock feed, can help reduce methane emissions in cattle. Amazing. So Dr. Smith joins us from San Diego. Thank you for being here, Dr. Smith. Also with us is Dr. Susan Purkey. Dr. Susan Purkey is Assistant Professor of Climate and Atmospheric Science and Physical Oceanography, also at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. She studies the Southern Ocean, that's around the Antarctic, and she has developed innovative methods to collect information to monitor the changes in the Southern Ocean to track how climate change is impacting the region. She works with the underwater robotic instruments through the Argo program, which collects information from the deep ocean and monitors the changes in temperature, along with many other oceanographic parameters. Much of our current research is focused on explaining the causes of deep warming and advancing data collection and measurement in the global ocean, especially in the regions of the ocean that are difficult to access with current technology. She joins us also from San Diego. And finally with us is Dr. Cara Field. Dr. Cara Field is the medical director at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, the world's largest marine mammal hospital. Dr. Field earned the status of diplomat with a specialization in aquatic marine medicine, one of only 30 veterinarians in the nation to earn that distinction. Her work is focused on managing the care and health of the center's marine mammal patients, spearheading numerous research projects, and teaching and mentoring the next generation of veterinarians and marine scientists. Dr. Field completed her dual doctorate of veterinary medicine PhD program at the University of California, Davis in 2005, where she studied the effects of high pressure on blood platelets from elephant seals, the world's deepest diving seal. and she joins us from Sausalito, I believe. Is that correct, Dr. Field? Yes. All right, I'm going to just start off by just, there's so much in these bios, but I'd love for each of you just to elaborate a little bit on what you're working on now so we can kind of get a more specific idea of what you're working on now. We'll start with Dr. Smith.
Sure. I'd like to start by thanking you guys for allowing us to share our research with you today. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess throughout my career, I've studied a variety of different marine ecosystems, from coral reefs, as you mentioned, to also California's rocky intertidal and kelp forest ecosystems. And through the years, decades now of research, I've just come to realize and come to see firsthand that climate change is really the single most dominant threat to these ecosystems. And so my recent research has kind of shifted to focusing on trying to find solutions to climate change and using solutions specifically from the ocean. So that's what I'm working on now.
Thank you. Dr. Field, elaborate on what you've got on your plate right now.
Well, first of all, I apologize for the distractions behind me. They were sleeping just 10 minutes ago. So as a veterinarian, I grew up here in California, and I wanted to be a veterinarian ever since I was a small child. And because I grew up next to the ocean, I also had this huge interest in aquatic animals. So I was able to, as I grew up, I saw how damaging some of the effects of humans and changes in our ocean had on animals. And so I was able to combine these interests in wanting to help animals with wanting to understand more about what makes them sick, and specifically aquatic animals. So in combining research with medicine, with veterinary medicine, that really provided me a lot of tools to better understand what is happening with the health of the animals that we share this planet with. It's impossible to focus on every animal, so I had a lot of interest in understanding the ocean environment in particular. So understanding why these wild marine mammals get sick, what they get sick from, and what are the health challenges that they, and thereby us, really also face, is a lot of what has driven my research interests as well as my clinical interests.
Thank you. Dr. Purkey, elaborate a little bit on what you're working on right now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I am more on the physical oceanography side, which means I really study kind of ocean circulation, fluid dynamics, and kind of the thermal dynamics of the ocean. And that really pulls me into the climate change arena, because what we are seeing is that the oceans are warming up a tremendous amount. And so much of my research is really around this question of how does the ocean take up this anthropogenic heat, and where does it go, and how does that affect the ocean and our climate in general. And where I fall in that is I'm really into our observing system. So figuring out the ocean is really, really big, and we have to figure out how we can monitor the whole thing and see all the changes that are happening from decade to decade. And so that's pretty much what I do.
The ocean is definitely huge. Dr. Smith, elaborate a little bit on what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my lab studies the health of marine ecosystems, both locally here in California, as well as across a whole variety of tropical coral reef ecosystems. Our work takes us underwater. We largely use scuba diving based approaches to study the marine organisms that are present in these ecosystems and how they are changing over time, specifically under a variety of different human-based stresses, whether it be local impacts such as pollution or overfishing, to global change impacts such as warming, ocean acidification, and sea level rise. And we try to use this information to kind of better understand how we might manage these ecosystems more appropriately to help them, to help ensure that they're around for future generations, and always looking for new creative solutions from the ocean, from the sea, to help solve problems like climate change.
And we're going to get more into these oceans. I love the fact that all of you have touched such different bases, and yet they all are impacted by climate change and the ocean. There's one thing we know, the ocean flows, and there's hardly any part of the ocean that's not impacted by a problem that doesn't show up in another part of the ocean halfway around the world. And it's so funny because we're terrestrial beings, so we forget that the oceans are really all the key to health on the planet. So let's dive into things. Dr. Field, you have been, you've seen firsthand the changes in the health of marine mammals. What new trends have you seen, and how are they related to climate change when it comes to marine mammals?
So up here in the Bay Area, we see a certain species that wash ashore regularly. And when these animals wash ashore, it gives us, and we respond to them and start taking care of them, it gives us this incredible window into their health that might be otherwise really hard to find. So and because these animals are basically sentinels of what's happening in the oceans, we're sometimes right on the front edge of what is of active changes. And a great example of that at the Marine Mammal Center here in Sausalito and all throughout California in 2015, we saw huge increases in the number of sea lions that were washing ashore. And most of these sea lions were young, starving animals. And in addition to that, the water temperatures had increased by several degrees. And it was one of the most dramatic increases in water temperature that has been documented in recent years. And it was associated with a El Nino Southern Oscillation, a very strong year. So what we think happened, or what happened during that time, is as the water temperature warmed, these marine mammals' prey that they consume were seeking colder, deeper waters. And for these very young, inexperienced sea lions, and even for the older ones, it made it very difficult for them to find food. So they washed ashore in incredibly severely malnourished, and we're able to take care of them. But again, that tells us that there's something off balance in the ocean when we see. Sometimes it can be hard to see or take longer to see at the lower levels some of these changes. But marine mammals are great indicators. And I can share a photo of what that looked like if that's all right.
Great, yes, please do.
So
it's so funny, we relate, being who we are, relate so much to animals versus fish, and yet they're equally important. But
exactly. So
oh my goodness.
So this is the kind of thing that we were seeing in 2015, was just thousands upon thousands of starving little sea lions that were anywhere from 6 to 9 months of age, coming in at basically at their birth weight. So that was a really significant impact, example of an impact that we saw of climate change and increasing water temperatures on a marine mammal species.
Were you able to save most of them?
So the Marine Mammal Center took in over 1,800 animals that year, which was about 3 times more than we were used to. And unfortunately, because so many of them were so severely malnourished, we were not able to save all of them. But that did give us the information that we gained from taking care of so many animals, whether they survived or did not survive, is critical to really understanding what's helping drive these shifts in prey for these animals.
Has there been any similar event like that since?
Since then, for sea lions, it wasn't just sea lions that were affected. Other species were affected as well, including the Guadalupe fur seal, which is a threatened species, who are recovering from the brink of extinction. So they were also strongly affected. And in the years since then, the last 5 years, we've continued to see increased numbers of Guadalupe fur seals washing ashore as well. We also, just in the last 2 years, have seen increased numbers of dead gray whales. And we're not quite sure what the reason for that is. But these animals are a great example of a marine mammal species that migrates over many, many different climate conditions. They migrate 10,000 miles from the Bering Sea down to Mexico. So when you have species like that strand and that wash ashore, it's really incumbent on us to understand what's happening with them. Is it a disease? Is it impacts of human activity, or is it climate change?
Thank you. Dr. Purkey, climatologists are reporting, unfortunately, that the 5 hottest years on record have been, I think, the last 5 years, virtually from 2015, 2019. That's the average global temperature, but at the same time, what is happening in terms of our oceans? They don't necessarily heat up, evenly all over, of course, correct? So how does these temperature fluctuations affect ocean per se, which is not the same as terrestrial temperatures?
Yeah, so while they're not warming evenly everywhere, they are warming and quite significantly. And you said before that, you know, I liked what you said. I forgot what it was exactly, but the oceans are really a indicator of our climate health, and that is very, very true in the sense of climate change, really. So the oceans, I think what people don't generally realize is that the oceans can take up way more heat than the atmosphere. And so when we think about the net amount of warming that the Earth's whole climate system has observed over the last couple decades, 93% of that is going to the ocean, and really only 1 to 2% is remaining in the atmosphere.
I'm
And
sorry,
so,
I have to get this right. You're saying the heat that we produce
yes,
through activity, 93% of that has been already, or is it on by the ocean?
So right when we think about climate change and we think about the radiative imbalance, meaning the amount of energy that's coming in versus what's going out, we're gaining about 0.7 watts per meter squared. And so that's kind of a funny number, but if you think about a 60-watt bulb, or you think about an old Christmas light is about a watt. And so that's saying we're absorbing that 1 watt per every 1 meter per 1 meter over the entire surface of the Earth. And of that, 93% is going to the ocean. And the reason for that is because water has a much higher heat capacity than air. So the amount of energy that it takes to warm 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, or a liter of water versus a liter of air, is just way, way more. And the other reason is the oceans are really big, and we have this overturning circulation, which is really important. So the surface ocean can come into equilibrium in temperature, comes to the same temperature as the atmosphere. And then we take that surface water and we put it down to, 3 miles under the ocean. And it takes that heat and it takes it out of our system that we live in our atmosphere, and it suppresses it. And this has really dampened the effects of climate change. And so what that means is that if we didn't have the oceans, or if the oceans weren't as effective at taking up heat, the warming that we would experience, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I mean, we would be experiencing warming that's 50 times the rate that we're seeing right now if we didn't have an ocean. And so the reason why what it's so important to understand how the ocean takes up that heat is, well, some of that is just the heat capacity. A lot of that is the ocean circulation. And as it warms, it's going to affect ocean circulation. And so what we as scientists are trying to figure out is both understand how it's changed over the last few decades due to that warming, and also predict how it might change in the future, because that will really affect how much heat, residual heat, is left in our atmosphere, and how much warming we experience here in California.
Wow. So basically, the oceans have saved us. We need to save the oceans if we're going to save ourselves.
Yes, the oceans, as far as the amount of climate change we've experienced and the temperature that you feel at your house, has definitely saved us a lot in that respect. So yeah, so there is different warming rates throughout the ocean, but when you take the sum of all of the heat that's gone into the ocean, is really, really large.
Wow. Amazing. Dr. Smith, your work with the 100 Island Challenge has brought you to the coral reefs off of some many remote islands around the world. Why are corals so important to ocean health? And in general, how are coral reefs doing? It seems like the news is all bad, but I've also heard some positive developments as well. Give us a rundown.
Yeah, so coral reefs are the most biodiverse ecosystem in the ocean. Even though if you put all the coral reefs on the planet into one area, it would occupy an area smaller than the country of France. Despite this small little area, they're home to over 50% of all of the species that exist in the ocean. So they're like these living museums. They are home to thousands of species of fish and invertebrates and corals and seaweeds and all kinds of different species of marine life. They're also incredibly important because they provide resources in terms of fisheries, in terms of supporting economies around the planet. Many of us have been fortunate enough to travel and go snorkeling or scuba diving on a coral reef simply for that experience, and that experience generates huge economic revenue in terms of tourism. There are also these living natural geological barriers. So if you ever have flown into, you know, the Hawaiian Islands or a Caribbean island and you see these huge turquoise rings around the islands, those are the living coral reef. The corals themselves are growing up towards the sun, towards the surface of the ocean, and the corals themselves deposit what's known as calcium carbonate or limestone underneath their soft tissue. So they're literally building rocks as they grow. And these rocks create the barrier that you see around these islands. And those barriers create a huge protective mechanism for these islands in terms of preventing erosion. So you think about big storms and ocean swells coming towards these islands. If those coral reefs weren't there, have much more erosion and much more severe degradation of those coastlines. So corals themselves provide a huge amount of ecosystem services to humans by creating these incredible ecosystems. So corals are just the building blocks of these ecosystems, like redwood trees are the building blocks of a redwood forest. Without the corals, you would not have these coral reef ecosystems. So how are they doing? And what's the 100 Island Challenge all about? I'll share my screen real quick. So the 100 Island Challenge is a campaign through my lab and Dr. Stuart Sandin's lab at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where we are using novel imaging technology to study coral reefs around the planet. We essentially take thousands of pictures of different coral reef habitats across 100 islands. We then can stitch these images together and build these 3D models of coral reefs. These 3D models are essentially replicas of that reef environment that we can take home with us and then spend hundreds or thousands of hours extracting our data once we get home. Allows us to go for these immersive experiences when we're far away from these coral reefs, and allows us to collect, you know, numerous amounts, just huge amounts of data that we hadn't previously been able to do. But the bottom line is that when you go around the planet, you see a vast diversity of, you know, states of ecosystem health in terms of coral reefs. There are reefs that are heavily degraded, and that comes in a variety of different forms. We like to, you know, put a lot of pollution in the water. We like to overfish. We like to, you know, increase greenhouse gas emissions, and all of those things are detrimental to coral health. Corals are incredibly sensitive to temperature, and so with more and more warming that we see, as Dr. Purkey talked about, corals have evolved in this very narrow temperature range, and so you give them a blast of temperature that exceeds, you know, 2 to 5 degrees above what they're normally used to experiencing, and they undergo a process known as bleaching, which is where they essentially release they have symbiotic algae that live in their tissue that give them food. It's like basically having a garden in your stomach that you get all your food from and you don't need to eat externally. Well, these little algae that are providing them their food get stressed under these accelerated heat conditions and release a toxin that is going to kill the coral if they don't get rid of them. So they release them into the water. That causes the corals to turn white. And if they don't have those algae for an extended period of time, they essentially starve. And that's why we've seen massive bleaching and associated coral mortality. But the exciting thing is that not every reef around the planet is experiencing mass mortality. And in fact, you can go to places far removed from human populations and you can see reefs experiencing stress, but then rapid recovery. And so we've seen this resilience and resistance in reef systems when you remove kind of local human populations from the equation. And so it is certainly encouraging for those of us who have spent our careers studying the health of these ecosystems to see that not every reef around the planet is on this trajectory to extinction, and that there are things that if we can better manage our human activity at a local level, we might be able to give these reefs a chance to survive this impending, you know, climate change that's clearly happening around the planet.
That's great. I did get a question, but it sounds like you sort of answered it. Someone that said, what are some of the promising research developments in coral resilience that could provide us with hope for coral reef 100 years from now and beyond? So that's, you kind of answered that. And we will get back to it if you want to elaborate, but I just want to also talk to the other panelists. Dr. Field, when you take a look at what's showing up on the shores, how does the pollution and water quality affect marine mammals? And I would think it would be extremely unique to each region and country, or is there something kind of universal that's affecting marine mammals, or is it really unique to each area?
It's great to have these folks here because all of our work really ties in together. And one of the things you do pull out is that there are very regional differences, but those regional differences also are highly impacted by ocean movement, by water and current movements and our atmosphere and everything. So pollution is a factor, while it's definitely a factor locally. So if we have, for example, untreated wastewater that enters our water, it can poison potentially marine mammals or humans, but it can also have effects down the food chain and throughout the entire trophic system. So all those new bacteria that are getting introduced can alter the normal bacterial composition of reefs, for example. So all of the pollution, whether it be something like sewage discharge or something broader like increasing plastics in our oceans and increasing our chemical content. So pollutants such as mercury that we use for mining enters the atmosphere and gets redistributed throughout the globe. So even if you are mining mercury locally, like here in San Francisco Bay, we use mercury for gold mining very, very heavily, but that mercury enters the environment and travels. And so it does impact marine mammal and human populations well beyond this area. Another example that we see of widespread pollution is pollutants. And this is very much mirrored in our sea lion population again, because we have an unprecedented rate of cancer in our stranded adult California sea lions, where 1/4 of the patients that we get that are adult sea lions or subadult have cancer. And this is unprecedented really in any wildlife species. And what we found with those animals that have cancer is they have much higher levels of certain pollutants like DDT, which is a former pesticide that was banned in the US, but is still used in other parts of the world. And PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, which is part of plastics and some other pollutants. So these are all examples of pollutants that enter the environment. They may enter locally and cause local damage or regional damage, but can be widely distributed, as my colleagues pointed out, with changes in water, with temperature. The chemicals might have been boxed up, but then over time, those things erode and release those chemicals back into the environment. They just don't go away. And so that's why these changes, again, the animals that we see washing ashore, we're eating the same things that they are. And so what is affecting these marine mammals at the level, they're predators, much like we are, whatever we fish for, whether it's fish or invertebrates or even marine mammals, we are also exposing ourselves to those same pollutants that we put in the oceans in the first place. So really our health and the marine mammal health, coral reefs, fish, all of these things are so strongly linked that the effects are so broad that we really have to sit up and pay attention to those changes, define them, figure out where those trouble spots are, and adjust how we manage ourselves in our oceans. So yeah, again, the marine mammals are great indicators of some of those pollutants.
Right. I think the LA Times just had a big story about the DDT, massive amount of DDT that was dumped in the ocean off the coast of Los Angeles, and I think between here and Catalina Island, still a problem after decades and decades and decades. So, but I want to go to Dr. Purkey. How bad is the melting? I know in the Antarctic, I see the headlines and I'm thinking, oh my God, you hear every now and then, this huge shelf is about to break off, and you're going, oh my God, what's going on? So give us the latest good news, bad news, and maybe some good news.
Um, yeah, I mean, the glacial melt rate off of Antarctica and Greenland is definitely concerning. And one of the things that we worry about is going back to kind of the ocean heat is, especially around Antarctica and the West Antarctic, where it's melting relatively quickly. We think that melting rate is being accelerated because you have warmer water getting in contact with the ice. So the ice is on land, but you have these big glacier cavities that are coming off and sitting over water. And so when you get warm water that's anything above freezing, that's kind of coming up and upwelling into them, then you can kind of accelerate that melting rate. And then the faster it melts, the faster the glacier will kind of slide into the ocean.
They're referred to those feedback loops, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of feedback loops that can affect it. And so that is a really active area of research, because if things are going to accelerate and they're going to melt faster in the future, that's something we want to know, because that will definitely accelerate sea level rise. And so it is definitely an area of research and something that needs to be monitored. And then the side that I kind of look at a lot too is how that feeds back into the ocean. So we're dumping a huge amount of fresh water that's coming off of those regions into really important regions of the ocean, where you do get this kind of what we call deep water formation, where we take water from the surface and put it into the deep ocean. And so there, the popular movie from the 90s, The Day After Tomorrow, was kind of based on this scenario where if you dump a huge amount of fresh water, you could turn off this overturning circulation in kind of worst case scenario. And so what we want to do is really understand how robust that overturning is. How much fresh water would we have to add to really turn that off? And the good news there is we'd have to add a lot of fresh water. That's not really in the cards that deep water wants to form. We have seen small variations on the order of kind of 10% changes. And that is concerning, but it's not those Hollywood dramas that have it 100% turn off. If it was 100% turn off, we would definitely be a little concerned.
Not here.
Yeah.
But just a follow-up question for you, Dr. Purkey, from Natasha. She's asking, what are you seeing now in the changing currents?
Yeah, so like I just mentioned, I study the Southern Ocean and kind of how we create some of the dense waters that are formed down there. And so this freshwater lens that's going on the top of the ocean has affected those processes. And so that is kind of a deep current that we see changes in. We definitely see other regions of the ocean. So the ocean circulation is going to be affected by winds, first and foremost. So if those are changing, we're going to see some small changes in circulation. And it's also really density driven, which means temperature or salinity changes are going to change the circulation too. So we're going to see all of those effects in varying degrees in different regions of the ocean. And it's just things that we continue to monitor. The Southern Ocean is someplace that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because it's one of the places that's changing and susceptible to changes that can really affect kind of the globe because of its role in taking up and putting out carbon and heat. So we pay a lot of attention to the Southern Ocean.
The same concept, everything is related, just like our body. There's not one organ or limb or any part of our body that doesn't affect another. The earth is exactly the same way. We hear this time and time again. A question for Dr. Smith. Can you tell us more about your work, the work you're doing with, I'm going to say this right, Asparagopus?
Think about asparagus.
Yes, I was going to say, it looks like asparagus, not quite. And I guess it has to do with how algae from the ocean can be used to lessen the damage from land that contributes to climate change.
Yeah, so this is a project that I'm incredibly excited about. As I mentioned, most of the work that I've done in my career is studying how humans affect marine ecosystems, both here in California as well as the tropics. And the one thing they all share in common is climate change is clearly the biggest threat to their future persistence. We have and are currently seeing changes to these ecosystems associated with warming, and warming is caused by greenhouse gas emissions. We all know about carbon dioxide, and we all hopefully are thinking about how to reduce our own carbon footprint. there are many things we can do individually in our own lives to have an impact on that. But aside from carbon dioxide, methane is actually the next most abundant greenhouse gas, and methane has 30 times more warming potential than carbon dioxide. So it actually is a pretty nasty greenhouse gas. And the one good thing about methane is that it has a much shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. We're talking 10 to 12 years as opposed to hundreds to thousands of years with carbon dioxide. So if we can find solutions for managing methane now, we would see those impacts within our own lifetime, or even shorter, hopefully. So what's the major cause of methane in the atmosphere? From a human perspective, an anthropogenic source perspective, the livestock industry is the largest contributor to methane emissions. And in fact, any kind of ruminant animal, things like cows and sheep and goats, they have enteric fermentation, which is the way they digest their food. And as a byproduct or a waste product of this fermentation, they burp a huge amount of methane. And that methane is just released into the atmosphere. And until recently, there has really been no way of helping make the livestock industry more sustainable, which is why it gets a really bad rap in terms of its environmental sustainability. But recently, some scientists in Australia had been experimenting with trying to understand how we could manipulate the fermentation process in livestock guts to potentially reduce methane emissions.
Really?
And experimenting with a variety of different species of seaweed. You know, seaweeds are these amazingly diverse group of marine plants that live under the sea, and they have been on the planet for millions of years, and they hold so many secrets, including their ability to produce all kinds of really interesting chemical compounds, which have been used in our own human drug discovery. So that's why they were working with seaweeds to see if maybe some compound that seaweeds produce could interfere with this process. And lo and behold, this one beautiful species of seaweed, Asparagopsis taxiformis, which is shown here, this pink feathery species growing here at Catalina Island in Southern California, when fed in very small quantities to livestock, could reduce methane emissions by 90%.
Oh my goodness.
This is a huge, a huge potential. So if we can, a number of research studies have been done that have kind of confirmed this, both feeding live cattle and doing more controlled laboratory experiments. And all of this work has essentially shown that we're talking feeding like 0.5% of what the cows eat per day. This Asparagopsis supplement holds these consistent results of reducing methane emissions, depending on the quality of the seaweed, between 70 and 90%. And so this is becoming a very exciting but hugely challenging future prospect for managing greenhouse gas emissions. And this is something where I have a PhD in marine botany, so this is something that's right up my alley. I never thought I'd be able to be working on a potential solution from the ocean to help make our food systems, our livestock industry more sustainable, and thus have potentially huge impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. So this is something that my lab has focused, has kind of switched to spending a lot of time working on, and this is the Asparagopsis growing in my lab. We're trying to understand how to commercially cultivate this at a scale that could be relevant, because we in California have 2.5 million cattle, and globally there's 1.5 billion cows, let alone similar number of sheep. And so we're talking about a pretty big challenge, but something that I'm super excited to pursue.
That is amazing. Who would ever thought a coral from the ocean could affect the digestion of animals under land? Oh, there's so many questions. I want to get to as many as I can. First of all, someone did ask a while back, can you import the images into a GIS system and measure, a little bit technical, I don't know, and measure sea volume of coral species across reef systems? Very interesting. Do you understand the question?
Yeah, so in the 3D imagery, one of the really great things about that is that with appropriate scaling and everything else, you can actually measure the surface area of different images or different objects in these images. So you can measure the area of corals, the volume of these different corals. And then with the 100 Island Challenge, we go back to the exact same spots year after year. And so we can measure change. We can measure what places on the planet are growing more quickly than others, what places are dying more quickly than others, and try to learn something about these places in particular that might make them more resistant or resilient to climate change. So yes, that is one of the great tools that we can use from these 3D images.
Got it. Boy, there's so many questions. Let's see. I want to get around to some of the questions for the others, because there's a lot more on corals.
I can try to type answers into the Q&A too.
one more for Dr. Smith there. There's a problem with our beautiful Farallon Islands, 30 miles from San Francisco, I guess, where our invasive rats are killing off breeding petrels. One proposed solution is to put out a poison, yet given the understanding of the spread and distribution of toxins, what do we do in a no-win situation like that? Are you familiar with this?
I mean, I am familiar with these types of kind of food web challenges, especially associated with rats. We had a similar problem on one of the Central Pacific islands that I work on. And there were over 1 million rats on this island, and working with a nonprofit Conservation International, Island Conservation, they were actually able to successfully eradicate rats. So there has to be a very careful plan in order to, you want to use the poison during a time where the nesting and breeding birds are not there. So I'm not sure if that's even possible in the Farallones, but there are ways to try to, get the birds off the island. You really only need a few days to get enough of this poison out there to kill the rats. If rats are really the only mammal that's there, if there are other mammals, you probably have to do something different. But there have been success stories where this has worked, and rats can be incredibly destructive to not marine food webs, but to food webs in general. And so if they're threatening extinction of native species, it's something that conservation professionals have come up with strategies to attack these types of things.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Field, are you in touch with what else is going on in other areas of the country or even of the world when it comes to marine mammal health? Because you said, each area is kind of unique. I assume that there are the conferences or ways to communicate so that you get the larger picture as well. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. That is part of my job, to understand what's happening with other marine mammal populations.
Any particular place that has a success story from somewhere around the globe? I know there's many challenges.
A couple examples, there are a number of examples of success stories and ongoing challenges. I can reach out a little bit further, still within our area, but a little further east or west, in the Pacific, with the Hawaiian monk seals, which are an endangered species. And as Dr. Smith pointed out, with water temperatures rising, loss of coral, we also are seeing some rises in water levels as well, with the addition of some water. And with the sea level rise, we're also seeing some loss of habitat for some of these species. And Hawaiian monk seals are one of those species that pup very often on little, very low-lying atolls. So with sea level rise, we're seeing loss of these pupping grounds for these seals. And so that's also impacting the population. That being said, with a whole lot of mitigation efforts to try to help improve the survivalship of young seals past being predated on by sharks and a number of other reasons, our rehabilitation center, the Marine Mammal Center, started a hospital for these monk seals in Kona, and we're working with the federal government to help increase the number of this seal species. So it's still sort of within our realm here in the Pacific, but it is something that's improving. Another story that comes to mind that we're certainly all very concerned about is what's happening with Arctic ice seals. And of course, we're certainly concerned with Antarctic ice seals as well, but some of the most dramatic impacts of climate change are as we see the loss of sea ice. We're also losing pupping and safe grounds for seals to have their young, for the young to be able to stay safe on this sea ice, both from predators and also just to rest. The loss of sea ice also allows us humans to increase our exploration and essentially start shipping sort of over the Arctic, which, you know, with the ice, the permanent ice and the sea ice, we weren't really able to do before. But with that melting, there's increased human activity as well. So we really have to understand the effects of climate change are changing how we work and live in the world. But it's really impacting these animals as well, at the top of the food chain and then throughout. So we're very in tune to what's happening, especially with these Arctic seals. We're very concerned that with the opening of more ability for these animals to travel, that potentially diseases or other problems could pass more closely or more easily. Diseases maybe these animals have not seen before, because the presence of the ice made them inaccessible to each other, and now that's changing. So those are a couple examples of animals that we're closely monitoring, and what we can do from associated with climate change. I'm not sure how much we can really reverse that process at this point, but monitoring these populations, staying vigilant, studying them and understanding when they die, if we see die-offs, or in the US, we have a process for studying those events with the federal government that can declare if we see a large die-off of animals, that is called an unusual mortality event, and that can help free up resources to better study when those events happen and why they're happening. So we do have the ability to be flexible and help our partner countries help figure out and study what's happening. So we obviously share the Arctic region with Russia, or the former Soviet Union, with a lot of other countries, Greenland, Denmark, all kinds of countries. And it's really, since we all share this unique environment, we all need to work together to understand what's happening up there and try to stay on top of changes.
Dr. Purkey, what is, when you, in terms of the Antarctic, we just often think of just bare ice, but there's a lot of life down there as well, and including mammals, is that correct? What can you tell us about the state of animal life down there?
Yeah, the Southern Ocean is an incredibly rich ecosystem. There's a ton of species that both migrate in to the feeding grounds and also are indigenous and live down there. I mean, you hear, this is getting a little outside of my specialty. I mostly think about the circulation and the physics, but we definitely see a ton of penguins down there and different species of penguins, and people talk a lot about that, especially on the Antarctic Peninsula, which is that stretch that kind of comes up towards South America. That's the northern extent of Antarctica, and the climate there has been changing really rapidly. It's been warming very, very severely. And ice melts along that, and when you have snow versus rain has been changing. And I know a lot of the species are changing of penguins, for sure, and so it is concerning.
Here's a question for maybe all of you, but it was addressed to Dr. Field from Mary. Thought you were leaving open the question of issues affecting ocean life. Is it climate change or other causes? Is there any doubt at this point? Could it be other causes, or is it pretty settled?
That's an excellent question to ask, and I would say that we do know some things that are impacting, associated with climate change, that are impacting populations, and others it can be harder to establish a link. But an example that I can think of kind of right off the bat is in the incidence increases in harmful algal blooms. So many, obviously, algal blooms are incredibly important for normal ocean life. And some of these algal blooms produce toxins, biotoxins really, that can harm animals up the food chain, including ourselves. And an example of that we see that seem to be increasing, it's probably also that we're better at detecting them and understanding the effects of them. But I'll go back again to 2015. We've identified several different species of algae that produce a biotoxin called domoic acid. And there are other biotoxins as well produced by different algal species. But domoic acid is produced by frequently by a couple different kinds of algae, and the common one we see out here is called Pseudonychia. So it was first actually described in humans on the east coast of Canada, Prince Edward Island area, where over 100 people became sick from consuming mussels that had been cultured in the water, and this algal toxin produces biotoxin, and over 100 people that ate those mussels got sick. Well, what we've seen is an increase since 1998 in harmful algal blooms that produce domoic acid. So much so that we would often see them just in the spring, summer, but in 2015, with the warmer waters, we saw these blooms pretty much throughout the whole year. And that sickened sea life, not just marine mammals, but seabirds. And of course, we ourselves can get sick from that. The biotoxin can be so severe that it causes seizures. A couple of people died in Canada that ate it. And many people developed amnesia for months or permanently. And so it's often referred to as amnesic shellfish poisoning. So climate change does seem to be impacting the frequency of these algal blooms that can be toxic both for us and for the animals. So by monitoring the animals that are washing ashore, testing samples like urine and feces where they'll excrete these toxins, and we can examine their gastrointestinal content to see what they've been eating and measure the levels of the biotoxins in their blood. And it definitely is very alarming that these algal blooms are on the rise with this one example in particular. And it's not just here on the West Coast, that's around different parts of the world. But of course, we have to stay vigilant, we have to monitor for it. So animals that wash ashore are an obvious indicator of a problem, but we have to continue to monitor, for example, fish that eat plankton. You know, what fish are eating this plankton that can pass it up the food chain? The other huge impact that these have are, you know, on us health-wise, but also economically. So these biotoxins are taken up, especially by fish that eat plankton, but also by filter feeders. So your bivalves, your mussels and your clams, and also crab. And here on the West Coast of the US, we have a very strong economic Dungeness crab fishery, for example. So when the crab ingests a lot of this biotoxin and we ingest the crab, it's very easy for us to get sick. So the California Department of Public Health has limits that are safe for consumption. And if the domoic acid level in those different species that are meant for consumption is very high, then the fishery will be closed. And that can have a huge economic impact as well. So it all really ties together both economically and health-wise with how climate change can impact everything about our health and these animals' health as well.
God, we have so many questions, and I apologize, people. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. I did want to ask you, because I think that we have almost 100 people watching. I'm sure there's some young women or men or whatever who are interested. How did you get into your field real quickly? And you're not in the lab inside all the time. You've been to, I think, beautiful places, out on boats and ships and so forth, right? So your work is not all just looking at computers and in labs, correct? We'll start with Dr. Smith.
Sure, yeah. For me, you know, I was always a water kid growing up, had to drag me out of the water kicking and screaming. And so it was really when I first got scuba dived and sat on the bottom of the ocean breathing that I realized that there was so much work to be done, and it was the space that I wanted to spend my time. And I was lucky enough to have been able to pursue that passion and that dream in my career, and ended up in an amazing place at Scripps. And you know, my career has evolved again from like being motivated by exploration and discovery to realizing how big the problem is with kind of anthropogenic impacts and trying to document those problems. And now it's kind of come full circle to trying to find solutions. So yeah,
You still get out of the lab and out of the office?
Oh yeah, I mean, our work requires us to go and actually study these places. And so whether it's working on a tropical coral reef, or even we do work in our rocky intertidal, which requires a lot less, you know, technology. We can just walk down there and with our cameras and measure all the amazing species that are right here in our own backyard. We do a lot of lab work as well, and you have to spend time behind your computer, otherwise you'll never know what your data say.
Dr. Purkey, how about you? How often you're able to get into the field, and how did you get into this area?
Sure, and I can show a couple pictures while I talk about this really quick. Yeah, so I come from a physics background. I always loved the ocean, but I always thought about oceanography as marine biology. And if I wasn't a biologist, I couldn't really get into oceanography. And that, I just want to say, is not true at all. Oceanography is very interdisciplinary. Climate change is very interdisciplinary. No matter what background you come with from the humanities through any of the sciences, you can really get into the climate change field. And so I actually just Googled some things that I like, and physical oceanography popped up, and I ended up going to grad school. But I started before going to grad school as a technician, and I was brought on ships to go to these beautiful places like the Southern Ocean. This is a picture of a recent cruise in the Southern Ocean.
Are people able to see it? I'm not able to see the photos, but it might just be me.
Oh.
I can see it.
You can see it? Okay, then it's just me. Don't worry about it then.
Yeah, so this is a picture of a boat. We spend tons of times on boats taking water samples. So this is a picture of a rosette that we use to take the water. It basically goes down to the bottom and we bring it back up. And I spend a lot of time sitting at the computer. And I basically just really fell in love with being at sea and getting my hands wet, and also feeling like what I was doing was contributing to a larger problem that we have as a society. Wow. And then most recently, I've really gotten involved with these autonomous floats. So these are pictures of Argo floats, and basically what we do is, as someone who's coming from more of an engineering background, it's really about the technology and being able to design these things to be able to get deployed. So these are about 4 feet high, and we drop them off boats. And this is a picture of one before it makes its first dive. And this is a schematic of what it does. It goes down to 1,000 meters, it drifts, then goes down to 2,000 meters, and it comes back up, and it sends its data. It measures temperature and salinity. We're working on having them being able to measure a lot of the carbon parameters and nutrients, and some of the optical properties of the ocean, which tells us about the biology as well. And so I work on designing these and getting them out in the ocean, and we have about 4,000 of these out in the ocean right now, profiling. And it's really exciting because they transmit their data every day. It comes back, and I can sit at my computer and see what the temperature of the ocean is everywhere in the world for that day. And that information is transmitted in real time. It's publicly available. It goes to when you think about weather forecasting, they really care about ocean temperature. And so that data goes into there, as well as telling us what these long-term trends are in the ocean. And so,
oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Those photos are great. Dr. Field, we have just a few more minutes. So do you get out of of course, you're dealing, I'm sure, with a lot of animals. At any given time, how many mammals do you have? And are you able to get out and about beyond the actual center?
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate that I've never wanted to work inside, although frequently working inside is kind of nice too. But I've been very fortunate to find a balance between doing research, working out in the field, and then bringing that information back, hoping to write it up and publish a paper or something else to be able to reach people and spread that word. I think all of us scientists, that's just part of the deal. It's incumbent on us to share what we learn, whether it be about the animals, the environment, whatever, to help inspire people to understand more. The Marine Mammal Center has a really strong message of education, in addition to our understanding what's happening with the animals. And I'm gonna share one other cute, just ridiculously adorable photo, because these little creatures are very compelling. So this is a northern fur seal, and while this is a species that's not currently endangered, their numbers have been declining, and we don't really know the reason for that. So every year we see anywhere from a handful of them to over 100 of them. In 2015, again, one of our worst years, that wash ashore that are in need of our help. So our work really is multiple parts. So we want to help the animals that wash ashore as individuals, but really the most important thing is the information that we gain from them, from why they washing ashore, what their health problems are, and what are the solutions? How can we prevent this from happening again? How do we help contribute to understanding what's going on, that climate change is driving some of these algal blooms. How do we fix that? So a lot of our work is really gathering the data and then teaching people about it. These animals are super charismatic. Obviously, they really pull on our heartstrings. So they're really great to be able to share. And coral reefs are beautiful, fish are awesome. But sometimes to get people's attention, having a really charismatic little creature like this can be a really good ally in helping try to understand what's happening in the environment and improving it for them and for us.
I'm told I can go a few minutes longer if you guys can stick around, because there's tons of questions we haven't got to. But one very interesting question is, how are the oceans affected by, and if so, how, by the recent wildfires? What is the nexus between wildfires and oceans? Any ideas?
Well, I think that's still, there's a lot of unknowns, frankly. The only study that I'm really aware of that looked at the effect of wildfires on a marine animal species is a study a handful of years ago that looked at genome expression in sea otters in a small group of sea otters following wildfires. And there were some changes in what the sea otters were expressing as far as their genome went that suggested they were challenged by the impact of the fires, but it's not really clear what exactly happened there. I think for myself, one of the field work that I did do was down in the Gulf of Mexico. I was working down there when the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened, and I was on the teams that responded to oiled animals, so sea turtles and cetaceans, dolphins basically. And we were worried that we would see some manatees as well. So taking care of those animals, but also understanding that that was a massive spill. It remains, the largest accidental spill. And the impacts are continuing for years and decades probably to come. And so while it was really hard to understand what those direct effects, whether it was smoke from burning off the oil that was coming up to the top of the ocean, or the cumulative effects, but it had a huge impact on dolphin health. And whales and dolphins, the way that they breathe, they're not used to breathing in a lot of particulate. They don't have the same air filters in their respiratory systems that we do as terrestrial animals do. So those animals, any whales and dolphins are potentially at a much higher risk of negative impacts from smoke. And the other big thing is runoff. So we use a lot of flame retardants to help fight fires, and that all eventually enters the oceans through runoff. And those will also accumulate in the end.
Red that they drop from those big.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we need that. I mean, we need to be able to fight these fires and save lives, but at the same time, what is the longer term impact on our waterways and our oceans? So a lot of questions remain about those impacts.
Mm-hmm. Final question for all of you. Looking ahead, say 50 years in your field, what do you hope to have accomplished, and what do you hope the situation will be? We'll start with Dr. Smith, then Dr. Purkey, and then Dr. Field.
For me, the biggest accomplishment that I can envision is having some success with this greenhouse gas mitigating solutions from the ocean. And if there's a way that this seaweed can be commercialized and actually have an impact, not just in California, but globally, that will be incredibly rewarding, not just from a personal perspective, but from a human health, ocean health, and kind of societal perspective more broadly. So that's one thing that, I see huge potential for, and is something I'm excited about. So. And I'm sure the ocean holds many other amazing, potential solutions. And so I'd encourage all of you young people out there, to be curious and to go into the ocean and think about some of these things, because we are going to continue to find amazing solutions like this. And it's going to be the next generation that does that. So.
Dr. Purkey, your thoughts about the future and what you'd like to see accomplished in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot with ocean monitoring, and I think having a sustained observing system out there where we can really monitor the ocean health from top to bottom, from pole to pole, is just really important for understanding and monitoring the changes. And the float technology, or these robots that we deploy out is really developing rapidly. And so I have really high hopes that in well before 50 years that we'll have this monitoring array out there from these floats that will be delivering data not only about the physical parameters, the temperature and salinity, but also about the carbon and about the nutrients and about the different species that live out there, because we can take videos and pictures and look at the spectra, what kind of animals are micro animals are living out there. And so I think that will help us answer a lot of these questions about how changes in certain environments can impact species, and also just help us understand as a whole about the ocean health. And so I hope
there's 4,000 of these floats already?
So there's 4,000 of the.
How many do you want? What's the goal? How many do you hope to get out there?
Yeah, so over the last really 15 years, there's been this huge push to get these out, and we have about 4,000 floats out there that monitor the upper third of the ocean. And so what we're working on now is new technology, and we've kind of just really developed it, but now we have to buy and deploy all these floats that go all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. And we want to see the whole ocean, and that's really important.
Would that be another 4,000 of them?
It would be, we could maybe we would have a maintained 4,000 float array, of which they went down to the bottom, at least a fraction of them go down to the bottom as opposed to just stopping at 2,000 meters. And then the other really big exciting thing that's going on right now is adding the biogeochemical sensors. So the ones that we have right now only measure temperature and salinity and pressure. And so the technology is kind of now there. And we actually recently just got a very large government grant to start deploying these. And so hopefully actually in the next 5 years, we'll really start to deploy in large number these biogeochemical floats.
You'll have much more data than just.
Much more data. So we got a grant for 500. So we're moving towards 4,000. We would like a few more, but this will be a good start to make sure that the technology can work and be sustained.
That's terrific. And Dr. Field, your thoughts for the future, what you'd like to see accomplished?
I'm honestly extremely excited about Dr. Smith's seaweed. That is so freaking amazing. I have to say that is huge. I think one of the things, and this here today just really wraps this up for me, is the necessity for us to all talk to each other and for us to continue to get our different messages out, because really they are all so interrelated. Bringing in young people to learn, to get excited about science and math, to find solutions. We absolutely, I mean, Dr. Smith has such an incredible way, like how do we continue to feed everybody on this earth without, overfishing, without polluting our environment? How do we reduce the impacts of climate change? It takes all of us. It takes really novel and ingenious ideas. It takes us all being aware of our own footprints and making the little changes. Even the little changes, if a lot of people do it, can go a really long way, like reducing your plastics use, using renewable energy, riding your bike. All of these things do have an impact. So I think, this webinar to me has been incredibly educational for my own self, and to see so many people excited and interested in wanting to help and be part of that change is amazing. So that really does it for me. So in 50 years, I'd love to see people that are attending this webinar, especially our younger folks, entering these fields and continuing to monitor, continuing to develop innovative ideas to help reduce the impact on our oceans and on our world, since we are 100% dependent on our oceans to sustain life.
Absolutely right. I cannot thank you enough both for all the work you do, your incredible accomplishments, your incredible dedication, and your generosity of your time this morning to share your thoughts and ideas and knowledge with so many other people. Thank you, Dr. Smith, Dr. Field, and Dr. Purkey. Really, really appreciate it. And now I want to remind our audience that coming up Tuesday, December 1st at 10 a.m. is Giving Tuesday, Alta Sea's webinar called Giving Tuesday. It's a webinar on sustainability, and we have philanthropist Melanie Lundquist will be here, LA Council member Joe Buscaiano. He's also the president of the League of Cities, and 3 Alta Sea team members, Tim McCosker, the CEO, Jenny Caruso, the founding executive director, and Robin Aubie, manager of advancement. They will be here on December 1st, Tuesday at 10 a.m. for Giving Tuesday for Alta Sea. So we hope you'll join us. There'll be tons of great information, and tons of opportunities for you to support AltaSea, which is an amazing place, bringing you not just these webinars, but also advancing both the science and the business for the sake of sustainable oceans. So thank you so much for all of you who at home. I wish I could have gotten to all the questions, but we really appreciate your being part of this. And remember, it's been recorded, so it will be posted and can be shared and watched again on the AltaSea website. Thank you all so much. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.